everybody. Welcome to Reckoning and Repair, how to empower whistleblowers and promote accountability. I'm Lisa Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of Open the Government. Open the Government is a nonpartisan coalition of over 100 organizations who are dedicated to advancing accountability and transparency in government. I'm joined by Dana Gold from the Government Accountability Project. Dana is GAP's Senior Counsel and Director of Education. And I'm also joined by Tom Devine, who is GAP's Legal Director. We'll discuss the role that whistleblowers played during the Trump administration and how new whistleblowers can help promote accountability for past abuses and what crucial reforms we need to strengthen protections going forward. This conversation is part of a series of ongoing events to promote Accountability 2021, which is a roadmap of reforms developed by accountability experts. If you go to www.accountability2021.org, you can find all of the recommendations, a list of upcoming events, a progress report on how the Biden administration and Congress are doing so far in addressing accountability. And I would just note that the recommendations in Accountability 2021 cover a number of policy areas to address cracks in the system that have existed for decades. But I will say that most of those cracks were exploited and expanded to new levels by the Trump administration. So the goal of Accountability 2021 is not to just go back to the sort of pre-Trump era of accountability, but to build even stronger systems with more robust accountability mechanisms than we've ever had in the past. So with that in mind, today we'll focus on whistleblower accountability, and I want to turn to Dana and Tom to discuss specific reforms to the system of whistleblower protections. And with that, Dana, I'll start with you. Can you explain why we need whistleblowers and what type of issues we've learned about recently thanks to whistleblowers?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and thanks so much for organizing this and hosting this event. We're so excited to be part of talking about Accountability 2021 recommendations and why whistleblowers are a really important piece of that menu of repair that is needed for accountability. And so, yeah, so whistleblowers have been important for years and years and years in every administration. Doesn't matter which party is in power, et cetera. Whistleblowers have made a difference, but we definitely, to your point, saw a profound need for whistleblowers to promote accountability and to kind of hold the line almost through really kind of an unprecedented willingness to spread disinformation and lies, really, to promote abuses of authority and power for political purposes. And, I was putting together to prepare for this, kind of the raft of issues where whistleblowers showed up and made a difference. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of those quickly so we can kind of see how employees of conscience, through the power of truth and information, really helped protect people and the planet and democracy itself. But for their disclosures, we would have been in even more of a world of hurt than we just survived, and now we're trying to engage in the reckoning and repair of going forward. So just to quickly run through some, obviously we're at the, kind of seeing the light with COVID, but, Rick Bright obviously was the, director of BARDA, who raised concerns about the administration's failure to respond appropriately to the coronavirus pandemic early on and the promotion of bogus treatments for COVID. Really important whistleblower. Dr. Scott Allen and Jody Rich are DHS contractors who raised concerns about the spread of COVID and immigrant detention and how that was going to create harm to not just immigrants in detention, but workers and the public, followed by guards and officers at the Richwood facility in Louisiana, validating those concerns. Jay Brainerd from the TSA raised concerns about TSA being vectors of spread of COVID. in airports, and his disclosures remedied what was going on, largely remedied the practices that TSA was engaging in. Climate censorship, that started right at the beginning. The assault on science, the march on science. We saw climate censorship and censorship of most of the science agencies start very early on in the Trump administration, when when the pictures of the sizes of the folks of the numbers at the mall of the inauguration, right, and that started a chain of gag orders that on whistleblowers. So Joel Clement and Maria Caffrey were really important climate science whistleblowers who spoke up about climate science censorship. In immigration, which is kind of has been my beat for the past 4 years, had from the beginning of the separation policy, bringing into public consciousness the abuses of the human rights abuses that we saw at the hands of this administration under the zero tolerance policy, from Antar Davidson raising concerns about the no hugging policy that catalyzed, mass protests, right? And, marching in the streets, and a congressional intervention, and ultimately a rollback. But after that, we still saw whistleblowers raising concerns about harms to children in detention. And, Dr. Scott Allen and Pam McPherson doing that as medical experts for DHS. We saw Ellen Gallagher raising concerns about ICE's widespread use of solitary confinement on medically vulnerable and mentally ill detainees. We saw Doug Stevens, the asylum officer, raising concerns about the illegal and dangerous migrant protection protocols. We then saw, even more COVID whistleblowing come up, in the immigrant detention context. And most recently, maybe folks are familiar with Dawn Wooten, our client, who raised concerns about hysterectomies being performed on detainees at the Irwin County Detention Center with dubious consent. We have politicization of agencies, DOJ whistleblowers, showing intervention into sentencing, and using antitrust investigations as a form to punish disfavored agencies. We saw Brian Murphy, who was a DHS whistleblower, raising concerns about election interference, by Russia, and that information being suppressed, as well as white supremacist groups. We saw intervention at the Voice of America agency, which is supposed to, enshrine independent reporting, and was completely using that as a tool of her propaganda and retaliating against whistleblowers there. And of course, the election interference, starting from Reality Winner way back in the day, to the Ukraine whistleblower, who we all know about, who catalyzed the first impeachment, up to Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who disclosed the Trump phone call trying to pressure them for the recount. So it's every issue where whistleblowers matter and make a difference through the power of information.
I mean, that was a pretty comprehensive. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
It's worth noting that it's not just the Trump administration.
Right.
Throughout the course of history, whistleblowers have been keeping the power system honest, and they've been the pioneers of change. And most recently, they've been changing the course of history more than ever before. And it's look at just before the Trump administration. Edward Snowden exposed that Big Brother had joined every American who uses electronic communications, and he led to the USA Freedom Act. These are the people who we count on as the public's eyes and ears. And the Trump administration put an exclamation point on that.
Can you, Dana or Tom, can you address, I mean, that's, like I said, that's a really long list, and you've sort of hinted at it, but how do what does that mean for the average American sort of sitting around the kitchen table? It seems like we can turn on C-SPAN and they'll be covering hearings of whistleblowers testifying before Congress. But what happens after that? What really do they do? What happens after they act as America's eyes and ears to promote accountability?
Yeah, well, so I think of, I mean, Tom will have his own, blush on this, so I'm really glad we're doing this together. The way I see it, it's the, whistleblowers show the power of information that they are uniquely witness to because of the position of their work, right? As government or even corporate employees, depending on what the wrongdoing they're witnessing, they're in the best position to see and prevent problems. And so that's why the laws typically protect whistleblowers, or are aimed to that, even if they're weak, and we'll talk about what improvements are needed. But it's the spark of the power of truthful information about significant abuses of public trust that catalyzed like the very gears of democracy. So in some ways, it's partly the result. It's like what the disclosure is. I just listed a huge number of examples of problems, but it's the spark of that information that makes our mechanisms of accountability kind of start firing, right? So through if a whistleblower, for instance, is making a disclosure to Congress, they have the power to engage in investigations and then to do lawmaking. But reporting from the press, for instance, juices the need and the urgency on the part of Congress or oversight agencies to engage in investigations and to conduct oversight and to promote reform. And so informed, so in the press is super important. Like they are empowering citizens through information to write to their Congress people, to become informed voters, to march in the streets if necessary, and it's all through that spark of initial information leveraged appropriately that can catalyze eventual reform. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's really slow. It really depends, but it does start from that kernel of information expressed from a whistleblower that can really make the gears of democracy work, and also to expose where those pieces of democracy aren't working effectively in response to a problem. So they have kind of a meta level as well. I don't know if
Obviously, at Open the Government, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would, agree. In a free society, nothing is more powerful than the truth. And whistleblowers, they're making a difference. They're having an impact on people's lives. Even beyond the list that Dana and I mentioned, whistleblowers are responsible for stopping completion of numerous nuclear power plants that were very likely accidents waiting to happen that could have taken out major cities. Whistleblower got Vioxx off the market, the super painkiller that was a killer painkiller, after it had killed between 40 and 50,000 Americans with unnecessary fatal heart attacks. We could go on and on and on. They make a difference, and the public knows it. When I first came to GAP 42 plus years ago, whistleblowers were generally considered, nutty or traitors. Every once in a while, their profiles encouraged. That was the rare exception. Now, in 2006, after the Congress changed hands from Republican to Democrat, there was a survey of American voters who had switched parties. What are your priorities for the new party? Well, 83% said stop unnecessary illegal government spending. Second place, ahead of the Iraq War, national health insurance, lower taxes, stronger rights for whistleblowers, 79%. And that's gotten better. Last fall, there was a Marist poll that found that 86% of likely voters want stronger rights for whistleblowers. The last time this happened, 2006 to 2010, that cycle, we got 12 free speech whistleblower laws passed. And this year, we're on the precipice of a real breakthrough for freedom of speech where it counts the most.
I mean, that's really that's extremely encouraging.
GAP released, Government Accountability Project released a sign-on letter that Dana's team organized for us, where 260 organizations said, we want first-class whistleblower rights, and especially for federal employees.
I mean, that sort of begs the question, though, if there is this support for whistleblowers, which I think is fantastic, and you made the case for more information, which obviously we at Open the Government, that's our bread and butter too, is government information in the hands of the public. And there's all this public support, and yet, we're still here discussing and fighting for the rights of whistleblowers. And I'm not sure why that is. Why are the protections not strong enough? And what risks do they take? If there's all this support for them, then why do we need to encourage whistleblowers even more if there is all this support?
Oh, this is a timeless struggle. It's been going on as long as there's been organized society. The people who had power eventually were going to start abusing it. And when they go too far, the folks who are the victims of it fight back. If they do it with guns, they're revolutionaries. If they do it with words, they're dissenters. Now we call them whistleblowers. But this is never going to be easy. It's never going to end. And those who have the power that they're abusing are always going to be the favorites, whether or not they're popular, whether or not they're in the majority. They've got the power. And that's why we have to mobilize the truth to neutralize that.
What are some examples of risks, like really specific risks that I think people could, would resonate with people that some whistleblowers have taken? Not the really long list that you've gone through before, but a few examples.
Tom, do you want to take that? I mean, some of the most obvious are issues that happen in the workplace, right? That people suffer demotions, write-ups. You're not a team player after getting excellent scores for years. All of a sudden, your performance appraisal is bad, or you're transferred, or you're fired. I think that forms of reprisal can go beyond the workplace. They can be, defamatory reporting, right, about that are negative profiles of the whistleblower. Often we've even seen civil and criminal investigations being kind of instituted against whistleblowers as ways to chill them and to terrify them and others, of course, into not reporting. So, I mean, it's really the limits of your imagination in terms of the forms of reprisal that folks can experience. Tom, I'm sure you have another, couple examples that you want to offer about how the risk is really real for employees who speak up.
Well, it's a life's crossroads decision. At least a professional life's crossroads decision, but a whistleblower, by doing that, is risking their personal lives too, their economic survival. They're endangering and risking their families. And at GAP, our first duty, a government accountability project, our first duty is to try and talk them out of it. Not because we want to succeed, and I'm upfront with them, I'm just trying to avoid working on this, but because they have the right to make a fully informed decision what they're getting into. Their life will never be the same, for better or worse, after doing this. And they have the right to know what they're risking by acting on their values. And further, if they're not prepared and making a real commitment, an informed commitment, they're liable to quit in the middle. And then it would have been better if they kept their mouths shut, because the bureaucracy will never forgive them. They'll still be target to be destroyed. But the misconduct, the abuse of power that they were challenging, it'll be stronger in the aftermath of them having dropped out from their challenge. So we warn people, and almost all of them go ahead and do it anyway. And what's the reason? Because they have to be true to themselves. As one of my clients said, Tom, I'm going to be looking at myself, I'm shaving the rest of my life. I've got to be able to look at myself in the mirror while I'm doing it. They have to. It would be their knowledge that they kept a secret would be like a poison in their souls if anything ever went wrong. And it's a very, very serious commitment.
I would just add to that, all of that is true. And when we talk to whistleblowers, especially even those who have gone through, suffered some of the worst retaliation, most would say they would still do it again. Even in retrospect. But I also would say, sometimes they would also say, I would do it differently. And that's where I guess, where we have seen an ability, especially the earlier employees come forward seeking help earlier in the process to understand their rights, risks, and options, and to get support. Not all whistleblowers suffer retaliation. There's a way to insulate them, to provide support, to craft a campaign that does exercise their rights and give them a little insulation. So not story is one of pain and suffering. But many are, and that is where the education about knowing what you're getting into and understanding your rights, risks, and options really matters.
Well, you've definitely, I think, made the case that whistleblowers are critical to an accountable government, to oversight, to fixing what's wrong with our democracy. So I'd love to move on a little bit from kind of what whistleblowers do to how we can protect them. So in Accountability 2021, we made a number of recommendations, and CAP was instrumental in crafting those to protect whistleblowers. And Tom, I'm wondering if you can talk about what the government can do. Specifically, if you had a few minutes with President Biden, what would you urge him to do to support and protect whistleblowers? And I'm also wondering, is there anybody in the White House right now whose job it is to protect whistleblowers? And if there isn't, should there be?
Well, I would be urging him to exercise leadership on this issue, the way he has on COVID-19 and infrastructure and the climate, because it's the foundation for all of his efforts, the truth. You have to have that. And the first thing I'd suggest for leadership is to respond to a real emergency that we have for all federal employees who blow the whistle. The board that enforces the Whistleblower Protection Act, where you get your hearings, has been dormant since 2016, since January 2017 for 4 years, thanks to the Trump administration and Senator McConnell, who wouldn't allow nominations to be confirmed. And that means there's a 3,200 case backlog for federal employees at the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board, their only forum currently. And he needs to appoint some members right away who are qualified and to deal with this. The second thing is to demonstrate that this is a priority for him, that he cares about it. And he can do that through using his leadership as to a bully pulpit. One is to have a White House Rose Garden ceremony that honors whistleblowers for defending our country against abuses of power from our own institutions. The other thing he can do is what you referenced, Lisa, is to appoint a White House Special Counsel for Ethics who's dedicated to whistleblower rights issues. In the Obama administration, President Obama appointed Norm Eisen to that role, and he was invaluable in passing the last major reform for the whistleblower protection rights of federal workers. It's at a standstill now, but we've got to jumpstart it, and he needs a person who's dedicated to that for the whistleblower rights community to work with.
That's great. Dana, do you have anything to add to what the administration should be doing?
Nope, I think those are all exactly the right ideas.
I mean, I think some of them are just such a light lift. A Rose Garden ceremony they could pull off tomorrow if they really wanted to, and would really, I think, be impactful. And you know, we wholeheartedly endorse having someone in the White House who really is focused on accountability, ethics, whistleblower protection. So we would certainly urge the administration to do that as well. Sort of same question, but what are the priorities with congressional leaders? Tom, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yes, their priority is on the big picture to restore the U.S. to being the global leader for freedom of speech. We passed the first whistleblower law in the world in 1978. And the second one wasn't until 1998. But now there's 48 nations with national whistleblower laws. It's going to be 62 with the European Union whistleblower directives implementation. And we've kind of gone from being the pioneers to the dinosaurs for free speech rights. You know, for example, we've got like hit and miss, patchwork, crazy quilt of 60 whistleblower laws in the United States. Other countries have one for everybody. In other nations, the whistleblowers are winning about 20% of the decisions on the merits. In the United States, it's 10% of the decisions on the merits. And there's big legislative opportunity. Government accountability projects working with trans-ideological, bipartisan, Make It Safe coalition that you folks are part of. And we're pushing for over 3 dozen whistleblower reforms in Congress this session. We think it's a unique opportunity. The top ones, though, and really the cornerstone for everything, they call the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act. And that's to restore credible rights for federal whistleblowers, people working in the federal government. You know, and it's ironic, they have the most significant responsibilities and potential to make a difference for the country. And they're among the weakest rights in the country. Unlike almost all other major sectors of the labor force, they can't go to court and have a jury trial to enforce their rights. They have to go to this administrative board that hasn't had a member for 4 years. They can't protect themselves against witch hunts, retaliatory investigations when they're opened. They don't have a fighting chance to get temporary relief, and the cases take 3 to 10 years while they're off a salary. Legislation that's been introduced by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform under Chairwoman Maloney's leadership would close all those loopholes and put us back to number one. The second big legislative challenge is what we call the COVID-19 Whistleblower Protection Act. That would give extra teeth to the current laws because of the stimulus spending that we're doing. In 2009, when President Obama's had a $700 billion stimulus, we had extra teeth for all that extra spending. We had extra teeth for the people who are the employee watchdogs over it. And it was credited with keeping very, very low rates of fraud or corruption. Well, this time we've got $6 trillion in spending and 500,000 American, 500,000 Americans dead. And we don't have any extra whistleblower protections. And there's all sorts of scandals about the medical care and the corruption and the fraud, and NFL players getting COVID funds to support them. And there's no excuse not to. Senator Harris sponsored best practice legislation that would also protect whistleblowers against civil and criminal liability, go beyond workplace harassment. First, a breakthrough for US law in the last Congress. And we hope the administration and Congress will get behind accountability on that one. And the third one that's really significant is for law enforcement reforms, a Justice and Policing Act. All those new controls on the police aren't going to be worth the paper they're written on unless we have whistleblower rights for the honest law enforcement officers whose testimony may be invaluable. The only way that we can enforce that law, we can't count on citizens with street cameras. We've got to have cops who bear witness and don't become martyrs in the process. Those are the top three in our priorities.
That all makes a lot of sense. And you touched on something that we haven't really talked about much in terms of the COVID whistleblower, the need for a COVID whistleblower whistle protection, is that, whistleblowers save the government a lot of money, right? I mean, they prevent waste and fraud. And when we're talking about, like you said, Tom, these trillions of dollars in spending, we want to make sure we know where that money is going. And, transparency and whistleblowing is going to be really important to make sure that we kind of tamp down any potential for fraud. We had a couple of other questions about whistleblowers themselves. How can a potential whistleblower reach out for help to you all?
They can contact us on our website. You can go to whistleblower.org. I think there's a button for contact us for assistance, request assistance, and we provide pro bono representation to whistleblowers. And if we can't support everybody and help everybody, directly, but we can provide support, resources, guidance, referrals. We have a ton of free resources on the website as well about your rights, risks, and options, and downloadable guides and tips about survival strategies. So there's a lot of different ways to reach out.
Great. And then the other question that came in is, what can people watching right now who aren't whistleblowers themselves, but what can we as the public do to support whistleblowers? How can we show our support and our understanding for the risks that these folks take?
Do you want to take
this? I'll get started on
it,
but Dana should finish because she's really leading our grassroots effort for advocacy. What we need is for the public to demand that their congresspeople, congresswomen, and senators co-sponsor the Whistleblower Protection Improvement Act and the other key whistleblower laws, that they get in there and get in the front lines for accountability. We expect it. It's been very, very difficult since all the controversy during the Trump impeachment to get Republicans who always have had a knee-jerk reaction of being on the bandwagon for whistleblowers to back them. All of a sudden, they're getting nervous about it. And the public's got to say, are you with us or not? And if you are, prove it, show it. And NGOs to join our sign-on petition. Dana's team got 260 groups in just the first few months of this year. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make that 500 groups. And at a certain point, the politicians don't have any choice but to support whistleblower rights.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I mean, I think that hearing that this is a personal issue, right? I mean, because the thing is, I think we've often otherized whistleblowers. It's like they're over there, but in that big laundry list that was perhaps too long, but was reflective or illustrative of a point, right? That every issue that you care about, right? Every issue that touches you as a person, a whistleblower has stood up in support of protecting the public interest. And we need them, right? So the rights that we need for whistleblowers, we need them to have those rights. They protect us, right? So that's the thing. It's not about the whistleblowers need more rights. They certainly do, but we need the whistleblowers. Like we need them for any issue that you care about, which is to Tom's point, why we are so thrilled that, with 260 plus organizations across issue recognize it's not that it's a whistleblowing issue over here. It's any issue of justice that you care about. Employees matter and make a difference. And so I really think that those phone calls to making whistleblowing central to any issue that you care about. You care about environment issues, you should care about whistleblowers. You care about immigration, you should care about whistleblowers. You care about democracy, you should care about whistleblowers. You care about fraud, waste, abuse, you care about whistleblowers. And that's why it should be important to you to call your representative to make sure that they prioritize that as well. So I agree with that. I think the other thing is, not to be self-serving, but following us to find out what is hot and what the information is. Because it is such an intersectional issue, everybody's a worker, right? We're all workers. We identify that way. And so sharing information about whistleblowing so people can understand why it's important to them or what they can do if they're in the workplace and see wrongdoing and what they can do about it, passing those resources along, saying, hey, here's this organization that's doing some really important stuff that actually matters. It goes a long way. It goes a long way. So.
Whistleblowers are the public's eyes and ears. When you defend whistleblowers, you're defending your own family. But it's unrealistic to expect that whistleblowers are going to defend us if they can't defend themselves. And that's why it's so essential that people join this effort. We'd be a lot longer than April Fools if we missed this unique opportunity to dramatically strengthen free speech rights in our country.
I mean, I think that's right. I think there is an opportunity right now, and I really do hope that President Biden and Congress seize that moment and take advantage of it because it is absolutely critical. This has been really illuminating. Your wealth of knowledge is extraordinary, as is your passion on the subject. I wonder if you have any closing thoughts you want to leave us with. Dana, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, sometimes I've been really struck about how, we're in this different administration where even in Biden's inaugural address, he prioritized valuing truth, right? Like that was something that he made extremely explicit. And whistleblowers are like the embodiment of that. I also think that we're at a time where the widespread public, not just those of us in the good government accountability world, but the public, I think the Post just came out with a new poll about this, that people are really concerned about democracy. They're concerned about the system and how it's holding up. And whistleblowers are a really important piece, as I tried to explain before, about how we make democracy work on every issue that we care about. And I think that the abuses, which were unprecedented in the past administration, there's a tendency, we all want to be like, we got through, that's over, we're done, and we're not. you know, there's a legacy of cost to the disinformation that was so pervasive in that administration, leading up to the point of an insurrection based on the big lie. It's a big problem. And so I think that, you know, we titled this Facebook Live, you know, Reckoning and Repair for a reason, right? Which is that actually there's still value to needing to know what happened in terms of all of the misconduct that I think we didn't get all of it out. There's still evidence of what happened that is really important for a full reckoning to prevent recurrence. I also think that there are ongoing consequences from that misconduct and from those abuses that we still need to address. And so, you know, I think a lot of employees stayed silent during the past administration because the risk of retaliation was so extreme, almost to the point of violence. And the fear of futility, which is the second reason employees stay silent, that speaking up won't make a difference, was really real, even though we saw whistleblowers make a difference, you know, throughout the administration. But so those employees, though, that maybe kept their heads down are in a position now in a safer environment where there's more receptivity to truth and where the risk of retaliation is far lower to come forward as part of that reckoning and repair that needs to happen to prevent recurrence. And I think we have this window right now where we are advancing legislative reforms to protect whistleblowers that are super important. The more whistleblowers come out, it also telegraphs why we need better laws and protections. It also fuels a Congress and agencies that are working actively on repair and investigating wrongs and correcting them. And that's been happening with alacrity. You know, we're not even in 100 days. So there's a lot more to do, but there's the intent is to repair and to engage in reckoning. And whistleblowers are really important to that. And I would just encourage those employees who may have witnessed wrongdoing to know that we are here to help you report safely and effectively. That's our job. We're honored to do it. And it's a privilege and to work with heroes of moral courage. So those would be my closing thoughts, that whistleblowers matter. They will continue to matter for both past, ongoing, and future abuses.
Absolutely. Tom, any last thoughts?
Sure. For whistleblowers, this is really kind of the best and worst of times. It's the best of times because we've got a historic mandate from the voters for stronger free speech rights. It's the worst of times because we've got a historic dip in bipartisan political support in Congress for whistleblowers. And that's why it's so important that all of those who hear our voice make your voice heard. Our big challenge is to turn the people's mandate into a political mandate. And if we do, it's going to be a lot better for everybody.
Well said, and a really great place to end. You know, please feel free to reach out to Open the Government, to GAP if you have any questions, especially GAP if you are a whistleblower or want to protect whistleblowers. They can definitely help you. But please, if you have any questions about any of the reforms that we've talked about here today, you know, check out our websites, check out Accountability 2021, and thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Tom. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks for having us.
All right.